What if I told you that a backup quarterback defeated the NFL's greatest dynasty to win the Super Bowl? Sounds impossible, right? Well, Nick Foles did exactly that. He shocked the world by taking down Tom Brady and the Patriots on football's biggest stage. But just a few years prior, Foles was benched for poor performance and was on the verge of retiring from the sport for good. So how did the QB go from the brink of quitting to becoming a Super Bowl MVP? To understand his incredible journey, we need to start from the very beginning. Coming out of high school, Nick Foles wasn't a can't-miss quarterback prospect. He was a 3-star recruit and ranked as the 25th best QB in the class of 2007. After receiving offers from a few schools like Ole Miss, Rutgers, and Duke, Foles decided to commit to Michigan State, but his time there didn't go as planned. After being buried on the depth chart behind future NFL signal callers Brian Hoyer and Kirk Cousins, Nick decided to transfer to Arizona after his freshman year. However, he didn't initially win the starting QB job. Matt Scott started the season as the Wildcats QB1, but after struggling in the third game of the season, he was benched in favor of Foles. From that moment on, Nick was Arizona's starting QB. Foles truly broke out during his senior season though. That year, he completed 69% of his passes for 4,300 yards and 28 touchdowns, which meant he was averaging over 360 yards per game. During the pre-draft process, experts predicted that Foles could be drafted anywhere between the 2nd and 5th round. At 6'6", scouts loved Foles' size. They were also fans of his huge arm that could make any throw on the field. But his lack of athleticism, bad footwork, and poor decision-making that led to lots of interceptions made teams hesitant to draft him. When draft day arrived in 2012, 4 quarterbacks were selected in the first round: Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin III, Ryan Tannehill, and Brandon Weeden. On the second day of the draft, Foles just watched and waited as more QBs heard their names called. Brock Osweiler was taken by the Broncos in the 2nd round, while Russell Wilson was selected by the Seahawks in round 3. But then, with the 88th overall selection in the 3rd round, the Eagles drafted Nick Foles. To start the 2012 season, Foles was starter Michael Vick's backup. But as the season progressed, Vick struggled, and some thought he should be benched in favor of the rookie. Head coach Andy Reid decided to stick with the veteran, but during a Week 10 game, Vick suffered a concussion and was sidelined, so Foles got to make his NFL debut. 2 weeks later, following his 2nd career start, Andy Reid announced Foles would remain the team's starter even when Vick returned from his concussion. In the team's very next game, Nick showed his head coach he made the right decision. Down a score with 2 seconds remaining, the QB threw the game-winning touchdown pass. He finished that game with over 400 total yards and 3 touchdown scores. In the 7 games Foles played his rookie year, he completed 60% of his passes for 1,699 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. But entering the following season, he wasn't named the team's starting quarterback. New head coach Chip Kelly said Foles will compete with Vick and rookie Matt Barkley for the starting job. During the preseason, Foles was outplayed by Vick and named his backup once again when the regular season began. In early October, Vick suffered a hamstring injury in the 2nd quarter of a matchup with the Giants. When Foles entered the game, he tossed 2 touchdowns, which led the Eagles to a comeback victory. Since Vick was still injured the following week, Foles got to start. In that matchup with the Buccaneers, he completed 70% of his passes for 296 yards and 4 total touchdowns, which won him the NFC Offensive Player of the Week award. However, the very next week, things went much differently for the QB. He completed just 11 of his 29 passes for 80 yards before being ruled out with a concussion in the 4th quarter. After missing the following game with his concussion, Foles was named the team's Week 9 starter versus the Raiders. And guys, I don't think you're gonna believe me when I say this. Just 1 game after completing 37% of his passes, Foles completed 78% of his passes for 406 yards, 7 passing touchdowns, no interceptions, and a perfect passer rating. How? Like, talk about a 180. I think that actually might be the definition of doing a 180. His 7 touchdowns have him tied with a few other players for the most touchdowns thrown in a single game in NFL history, and he also became just the 3rd player in NFL history to throw that many touchdowns without an interception. Just absolutely pretty insane stuff. After this historic performance, Foles continued to play at a really high level. He was extremely efficient and wasn't turning the ball over. In the 10 games he started that year, he completed 64% of his passes for 2,891 yards, 27 touchdowns, and just 2 interceptions. Foles also finished the year with a 119 passer rating, which was the 3rd best in NFL history at the time. With their quarterback playing at this historic level, the Eagles went 10-6 and won the NFC East. In his first playoff game, Foles completed 69% of his passes for 190 yards and 2 scores, but the Eagles lost after the Saints hit a last-second game-winning field goal. Following the loss, Foles was named a Pro Bowler and actually won Offensive MVP in the game. Also guys, I know we all have busy lives and can't afford to waste a day stuck on the couch because of a few drinks the night before. So that's why I'm excited to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. It's the answer we've all been looking for. Pre-alcohol is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to drink this probiotic before drinking alcohol. Drink responsibly and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. So start the year right by adding pre-alcohol to your routine. Go to zbiotics.com/SheGotSports, or you can scan this QR code up here to get 15% off your first order when you use code SheGotSports at checkout. You can also sign up for a subscription using my code so you can stay prepared no matter the time or occasion. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/SheGotSports and use code SheGotSports at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this video and our good times. In 2014, Nick Foles failed to replicate the success he had the year prior. Due to Philly's defense giving up a ton of points, the quarterback was forced to throw the ball a lot. But he wasn't doing it efficiently. He started to turn the ball over more and more. Then, in a Week 9 matchup with the Texans, Nick went down with a broken collarbone, which ended his season. In the 8 games he started that year, he won 6, while completing just 59% of his passes for 2,100 yards, 13 touchdowns, and an ugly 10 interceptions. But then, before the start of the 2015 season, something happened that shocked the entire league. The Eagles traded Nick Foles, a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick to the Rams for quarterback Sam Bradford. But Foles got off to a hot start with his new team. In the first game of the year, he led the Rams to an overtime victory versus the Seahawks, who had one of the best defenses in the entire league. But after that win, things went downhill fast. Foles' accuracy started to decline, and his turnover problem from the previous season returned. In Week 5 versus the Packers, the QB completed just 36% of his passes for 1 touchdown and 4 interceptions. After completing just 47% of his passes in Week 10, Foles was benched, and Case Keenum was named the team's starter the following week. Keenum suffered a concussion in his first game, so Foles was then given the starting job back. But his play only got worse. In his first start after being benched, he threw 3 interceptions and no touchdowns. Once Keenum was healthy again, he took over as the starter, and Foles returned to the bench. After that season, the Rams selected quarterback Jared Goff 1st overall in the 2016 draft and released Foles. At this point, the QB was actually contemplating retirement. But then his former coach, the one that drafted him, Andy Reid, reached out. He wanted Foles to come be a backup QB on his new team, the Chiefs. So because of his relationship with Reid, Foles decided to keep playing. As Alex Smith's backup in Kansas City, Foles only saw action in 2 games. After his 1 year with the Chiefs, the QB was a free agent, and prior to the 2017 season, his former team, the Eagles, decided to sign him to a 2-year deal to back up their 2nd-year quarterback, Carson Wentz. Well, to start the 2017 season, the Eagles and Wentz were on fire. Philly had just 1 loss through 12 weeks, and it was looking like Wentz was going to win MVP. But then, in Week 14, everything changed. That week, in a matchup with the Rams, Wentz dove for the end zone, but his leg ended up getting sandwiched between 2 defenders. He then limped back to the locker room, and it was soon revealed he had torn his ACL, which ended his season. The Eagles were the favorite to win the Super Bowl. But now without their starting QB, many felt their season was over. With Wentz out, Foles was named the team's QB1. In the 2 full games he started before the playoffs, Foles looked okay. but he wasn't playing against good teams, so many still didn't believe the Eagles could win a playoff game with him under center. Despite being the #1 seed in the NFC, the Eagles were 2.5-point underdogs in their first playoff game versus the last seed Falcons. This game started out as a low-scoring one, with the Falcons leading 10-9 at halftime. But then, in the second half, Foles started to get into a rhythm and led the Eagles on multiple drives that ended in field goals. In the final minute of the game, Philly was up 15-10, but the Falcons had the ball on their 2-yard line. The Eagles defense stood tall and kept Atlanta out of the end zone to secure their first playoff win in 6 years. Foles didn't throw a single touchdown pass in that one, but he managed the game well, completing 76% of his passes for 246 yards and no turnovers. So the Eagles were headed to the NFC Championship game and were set to face off with the Minnesota Vikings, who were quarterbacked by Case Keenum, the man who had replaced Foles as the starter a few years ago in St. Louis. Yet again, Philly was an underdog, this time by 3 points. People didn't think Foles would be able to beat a Vikings defense that had been so good all year long. But I guess you could say he took that personal, because Foles absolutely obliterated the Vikings defense in the NFC Championship game. He completed 78% of his passes for 352 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no turnovers as the Eagles won 38-7. Everyone was like, whoa, where did this come from? How is this backup quarterback playing at an elite level out of nowhere? He was almost doing everything perfectly in that game. He was almost perfect. This was his team now, and people had forgotten about Carson Wentz. So Foles and Philly were headed to the Super Bowl. And who were they set to face off with? None other than the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. Even after a dominant win versus the Vikings, the Eagles were still underdogs in the big game. The Patriots were favored to win by 4 points. But from the moment Foles stepped on the field, he dominated. On the Eagles' first possession, he led them on a 14-play, 67-yard drive that took 7 minutes and resulted in a field goal. The very next drive, he tossed a touchdown to Alshon Jeffrey to put them up 9-3. Then, with 38 seconds left in the first half, the play happened that changed Foles' life forever. It was 4th and goal at the 2-yard line, and the Eagles called a timeout before to talk the play over.
You want Philly?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
As the Eagles lined up to go for it on 4th down, the announcers were like, whoa, this is an unbelievable call to go for this. Like, why aren't you just hitting a chip shot field goal to extend your lead? Then this play happened. The Philly special, which put the Eagles up 10 at halftime. The Patriots opened the second half with a touchdown drive of their own, but Foles responded by dropping this absolute dime to Corey Clement for another Eagles score. With just under 9 minutes left in the game, the Patriots scored a touchdown to take a 1-point lead. But Foles didn't panic once he got the ball back in his hands. He instead led his team on a methodical 14-play, 75-yard touchdown drive to reclaim the lead with just over 2 minutes remaining in the game. When New England got the ball back, the Eagles forced a fumble, which set up the game-clinching field goal, and Philly went on to win 41-33. Foles played one of the best games of his career in the big game. While leading the Eagles to their first Super Bowl victory ever, he completed 65% of his passes for 373 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 1 receiving, and was named the game's MVP. After such an insane performance in the biggest game of the year, the media started asking if Foles should be the Eagles starter even once Wentz was healthy. And before the start of the following season, a trophy of Foles was unveiled outside the Eagles Stadium. By week 1 of the 2018 season, Wentz was still recovering, so Foles started the first 2 games of the year, but really didn't turn any heads with his play. So once Wentz was cleared to go in week 3, Foles returned to the bench. But then, in November, news broke that Carson had fractured his back and would miss the remainder of the season. So Foles was back under center, but this time around, the team was far from being a #1 seed. When he took over as the starter in week 15, the Eagles were 6-7 and fighting for a playoff spot. But then, Foles sparked the team. With him as their QB, they won 3 straight games, which locked up the last playoff spot in the NFC. And then his teammates built him a shrine. Yes, a shrine in their locker room. At this point in time, some people felt like the team was playing better with Foles under center rather than Wentz. And it turns out that's actually kind of true. Wentz was a polarizing figure in the locker room, while Foles was universally loved. Also, side note, if you want more backstory about that, I did a whole video about Carson Wentz and the things his anonymous teammates said to the media about him. If you want to hear more about that, just check out this video. I'm going to link it in the description. In the wildcard round of the playoffs that year, the Eagles were big underdogs versus the 3-seed Bears. Foles' stats weren't eye-popping in that one, but he did throw the game-winning touchdown with just under a minute left. After that win, the Eagles were headed to New Orleans to take on the 1-seed Saints. After Foles passed for a touchdown and ran in another, Philly had a 14-0 lead in the second quarter. But then the Saints offense came to life, and the Eagles found themselves down 20-14 with just under 3 minutes left to play. Foles got the Eagles down inside the Saints 30, but then his pass bounced off Alshon Jeffrey's hands and was intercepted, which sealed the victory for the Saints. After the season ended, Foles became a free agent. He's recently stated in a podcast that if it was up to him, he never would have left Philly, but some unique circumstances made it so it was probably the best choice for the team and for himself to leave, which I personally think has to do with Carson Wentz not wanting him there, but again, that's just my own speculation. That is not confirmed. As a free agent, Foles signed a 4-year, $88 million deal with the Jaguars, a team with a great defense that just needed a quarterback to take them to the next level. But in his very first game with the team, Foles broke his clavicle and had to undergo surgery. Fortunately, the injury wasn't season-ending, and he returned in Week 11. However, once he returned to the field, he just wasn't playing well. And after having 3 turnovers in the first half of the team's Week 13 game, he was benched. He started just 4 games for the team that year and had 736 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 2 fumbles. After just 1 season in Jacksonville, the Jaguars traded him to the Bears for a 4th-round pick. He started the 2020 season as Mitch Trubisky's backup, but after Trubisky was benched, Foles got to start a handful of games until he suffered a hip injury, which resulted in Trubisky getting his starting job back. In 2021, Foles was the 3rd QB on the depth chart, behind Justin Fields and Andy Dalton. He only saw action in 1 game and was waived at the end of the year. Before the start of the 2022 season, the Colts signed the QB to a 2-year deal. He was the 3rd-string QB behind Matt Ryan and Sam Ehlinger, but after Ryan was benched for the 2nd time that season, Foles got the chance to start. His first start for the team came in Week 13, and he threw for 143 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Despite this, he was given the nod to start the following week too, but in that game, he injured his ribs after taking a sack and had to be carted to the locker room. Unfortunately, that was the last time we saw Nick Foles on an NFL field. No team signed him in 2023, and in 2024, he signed a 1-day contract with Philly to retire as an Eagle. If you want to know about the whole Carson Wentz saga, the quarterback Foles replaced when they won the Super Bowl, you can check out this video up here. There was a lot of drama behind the scenes, and it was kind of ugly.